Welcome to Haunting Live Podcast, a place where we bring a new paranormal guest each episode to share their journey and experiences.
It was about 3 o'clock in the morning.
Welcome to the hospital night shift.
There's really strange things happening at this hospital.
When healthcare workers tend to the sick, the dying, and the dead.
They're just waiting for their chance to come and get you.
Now, the only life that needs saving is their own.
I couldn't breathe.
If I was to call out for help, no one would be able to hear me.
Haunted Hospitals. Season premiere April 5th at 10 on TNE.
I am Meg Harrell. I've been a nurse for 15 years. I also have a segment called The Creepiest Things That Have Ever Happened to Me as a nurse.
Okay.
And that kind of caught the eye of Haunted Hospitals on TNE. And they said, hey, will you come on and tell some of your most creepiest stories that have happened to you?
My name is Kimberly Kidson. I'm a travel nurse. I've been a nurse for 10 years, travel nursing now for 7 years. And I'm here to talk about some of the experiences that I've had through travel nursing.
The paranormal can happen at any time, so that's why our Etsy store is always open. Get your paranormal items from cleansing to protection to attraction, all available now on our Etsy store. Search Haunting Live. Thank you very much for joining me here on Haunting Live for this Haunting Live podcast. We do a paranormal podcast show on YouTube and the audio apps, so it's great to talk to you about your experiences today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah. First of all, before we get into things, can you just briefly introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and a bit about what you do?
Sure. I am Meg Harrell. I've been a nurse for 15 years. Right now, I work full-time tutoring nursing school students and helping them pass their bar. On my website, nursemegrn.com, I have a TikTok at nursemegrn where I teach certain concepts. I tell funny stories, do skits, but I also have a segment called The Creepiest Things That Have Ever Happened to Me as a nurse.
Okay.
And that kind of caught the eye of Haunted Hospitals on TNE. And they said, hey, will you come on and tell some of your most creepiest stories that have happened to you? And that's kind of how we got connected.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't just like you had something happen, but you actually have your whole list of things that happened to you. So that's kind of interesting.
There's something, the veil is very thin around me. And lots of things happen. I mean, since I was a kid, I feel like ghosts and just inexplainable things follow me around.
Okay, then my first question then is, do you feel you have any type of abilities? Like, do you feel you have mediumship, or do you feel you have a connection to spirit at all?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I've got a little bit of maybe intuitiveness where I can kind of read people a little bit and kind of see maybe their character that they're trying not to show. And I've definitely had some experiences where I dreamt something and it happened.
Yes, that would be a lot in line of intuitiveness, or you're picking up on things, you're sensing what might happen. Yeah. Okay, so how did things start for the show then? Like, what was your first thing they wanted you to talk about the show?
So they reached out to me and they said, you know, you have so many stories. I think I'm on part 80 something by now because I've got so many things to tell. And sometimes I tell other people's stories and they said, well, let's pick, you know, your top 2 that you love to tell or that people love to hear. And, you know, we'll film it and let's talk about it. So I had one story about a woman who predicted her own death. And she was going in for the most routine, silly, simple procedure. And she kept saying, I'm going to die. And the family and the doctor kept reassuring her, this is so simple. It's a simple little procedure. You're going to be out in, you know, later in the day or the very next morning. It's going to be fine. Sign the consents. And she was like, fine, but I'm going to die. She was so sure. And as she left, she kept saying it. I'm going to die. I'm not coming back to this room. I'm going to die. She was so sure of herself. And we were all so sure. This is a procedure we do 30 times a day. This is going to be totally fine. She goes down to the procedure room to have it done. And probably 5-10 minutes later, I hear code blue, OR room 2. And I knew it was her. And I look into the room and her hospital bed was there, wheels locked, and it moved probably 1.5 feet by itself towards the window with the wheels locked. And I had taken the EKG leads off of her and swung them over the monitor. And I looked at those and they were swinging back and forth violently. And whew, I'm getting goosebumps telling the story now. It was like she was coming back to be like, I told you so. I told you. And she she was right.
So how long have you been working in the field for then when things started to happen? Have they always happened to you, or
I mean, pretty
did
immediate.
it take a long time?
I've been a nurse for 15 years, but I worked as, a secretary and nurse's aide a little bit before that.
Mm.
And I mean, things started happening. I don't think they've ever started or stopped. It's kind of just since I was a kid, where whatever job I've had, it's something's chilling is gonna happen.
Yeah. Sounds like you might have a bit of mediumship or abilities within you. You have that draw to the spirit energies. So if you've had it been happening the whole time. So rather than being in the spot in a hospital, you think you'd be drawn to that type of energy as well. Like things happen more when you're in that environment. So do you find that? Do you find they build up more in the hospital?
Yes, definitely in crowded places like theme. I mean, I live in Orlando. Theme parks, there's lots of people and lots of history. But yes, especially in hospitals, it makes sense that the season 5 of Haunted Hospitals is going to premiere on April 5th at 10 p.m. because there's so many stories. I mean, hospitals have been around for years and years and years, especially the older ones, and they just kind of expand on what existed. And so much trapped energy and stories kind of mixes in there.
So how did you feel when you had your first experience in the hospital? Were you scared about it, or?
No, I've never really been scared about things moving on their own, or seeing things at the corner of my eye, or doors slamming. I've never felt threatened or scared by any of that stuff. Sometimes it'll startle me, but I've never felt like I was in danger ever, even as a kid. Maybe it's because I am somehow protected from it or something, but it doesn't scare me.
Well, that's good, because it's good to be kind of on guard, but not that it scares you all the time, because you don't want that happening. So
I did have an older nurse. She was like my nurse mom. She had been a nurse for probably over 40 years. And we had a empty room. It was night shift, and the bed alarm kept going off and the call bell alarm kept going off. And nobody was in there. And I actually unplugged it from the wall and put it on the bed because it was bothering us so much at the nurse's station. It kept going off and we're like, somebody needs help. Oh, it's the empty room, or it's the ghost in the room. And my nurse mama, she was an older Jamaican lady. She busts in the room and she was like talking to the spirit or ghost or whoever's in there. She's like, we don't have time for this. All the other rooms are full. Quit messing with all the stuff. We're trying to work and you're distracting us. No more of this. And then she slams the door, and it didn't happen for the rest of the night. It was like she put that ghost in its place, or maybe it was just being playful, and the ghost was like, all right, I'll let you get back to work.
That's one thing we tell our clients, or when we have people to ask us questions about the paranormal stuff they're dealing with, we tell them to do that exact thing that she just did.
Yeah.
We tell them to lay down the rules of your home, treat it like a child, and give it no room for excuses. Just lay down the rules, right? And quite often that works. So,
oh, I love that. Yeah, set boundaries, even with ghosts.
Yeah, it's like, you can come during the daytime when I'm here if you want to talk to me, but leave me alone at night. So,
I
stuff
love
like that.
Yeah,
advice. We tell that to people all the time. So, yeah. What has been one of your most, I want to say scariest, but most weirdest, unusual experiences you've had then?
Yeah. So there's one that I told on my episode of Haunted Hospitals. My episode is the 6th episode, and it premieres Friday, May 10th at 10 p.m. And I told this story about when I had to go and get a new bed from another side of the hospital. And it was in the middle of the night, me and this other tech travel through the multiple floors. We have to go through this glass hallway that connects 2 buildings of the hospital, go get that bed and bring it all the way back. So we go and get it. And as we made the bed and got it all set up, and we're coming back to our building through the glass hallway, 2-3 in the morning, half the lights are off, because they save the electricity and everything's dull. We get almost past the middle and the lights flicker off. The tech I'm with screams because she's easily startled, and we're in the dark. It's complete darkness in this hallway. And I scream because she screams, and then the lights flicker back on. And in the center of the bed that we had just made is a man's footprint, like a dress shoe man's footprint in the center of the bed. And it was terrifying. How? I still have the picture up on my Instagram. Terrifying. There's no explanation. What? We had just made that bed, and it was a man's footprint, like they had stepped into the bed and the bed sheets and everything. And we rushed out of there. I never went back in that hallway ever again.
No, take the other hallway next time.
Nope. Someone else go for me. I never went back. Even during the daytime, if I worked day shift, I couldn't go back in that hallway. Just, I didn't like it.
Well, especially if you yourself just made it and you know what condition it's in, and to see something visible like that there right after, like, you know, something weird happens. So
Yes.
has there been anything that kind of you couldn't explain at a shift on the hospital, you know, like something, well, they're all really things you can't explain, but something so bizarre, so unusual that to this day you can't say, like, what was that?
Yeah, there's so many.
Yeah.
But there is what it usually.
Assuming I don't want to go through your whole list of things, but
I know. Yeah, I'm already on part 80 something on TikTok. But it usually sticks with me more when it doesn't just happen to me, when it happens to multiple people or somebody else is involved, because it makes me, it almost validates it a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then I remember it more vividly. There was this one patient who was on hospice care. They were in their last couple of hours, and they had what is called a sitter with them. So the nursing care or hospice group will hire somebody to sit with the dying patient so that they don't die alone. Also to just take care of basic needs, make sure their mouth isn't dry, you know, just basic nursing care things. And the sitter was there in the room. The patient was technically assigned to me for any medications and things. I would go in there probably once an hour to just, hey, you need anything? Do you, the sitter, need to go to the bathroom? And connect. So I got to know her pretty well. And this was probably halfway through the shift in the afternoon. And I'm charting outside of the room, and she slams the door shut. And I was like, don't slam the door. And so I opened it up, and I was like, hey, you know, with a patient like this and family coming, let's leave the door open. You know, we don't have to close it. And the sitter is looking at me like, I didn't close it. And I said, oh, okay. So maybe it was the CNA that went in and then kind of closed it. So I opened the door, I put it halfway, I go back to charting, and then probably like 15, 20 minutes later, it slams again. And I was like, okay, now it was her. So I go in and I said, did you slam the door? And she goes, no, I did. I've been sitting here next to the patient. I haven't touched the door. And then we're both looking at each other like, oh, what is happening? The spirit, this patient wants the door closed. So I shut the door and I said, okay, we'll go against whatever the policy is for this little hospice floor. We'll keep the door closed. We close the door, and a couple minutes later, the patient passes and does final breaths. And it was like this patient just wanted a little privacy to die. And that was one that really stuck out to me because it was happening to more than one person.
Well, it's good when they can validate things, and especially you're not alone when something like that happens, when you got somebody passing away that moment and something happens multiple times that you can't control. So, but yeah, it does sound like they just wanted to be alone for their final moments. So,
and it's so beautiful that they had that ability to just say, just give me a little privacy while I go. Yeah. I think that's kind of great.
Yeah, it's nice too. Well, sometimes people have their families, sometimes they just want to be alone. So, but how did the filming for the show go? Like, how many episodes did you shoot yourself, and sort of what kind of experiences did you have with the actual filming of the show?
Yeah, it was really fun. So they kind of gathered everybody, all the, it's first-hand accounts from like nurses and healthcare workers and patients. So they flew us all into one location and filmed it over For me, it was just filming for a day, and other people were other days. But it was so fun to get together and meet other healthcare workers and patients and people that were interested in the paranormal. And then it was so fun to hang out with the crew who loves this stuff. Sometimes people are not interested in talking about the paranormal. Sometimes they're just non-believers. But to be in a whole room with a bunch of other people that are interested in the same thing, it was really fun.
How long did it take? Did you film one episode at one time, or are you just in the one episode so far? Or?
Yeah, my stories are just on the 6th episode of this season 5. So season 5 premieres April 5th at 10 p.m. And then my episode 6, premieres on May 10th at 10 p.m.
Sounds exciting. Can't wait to check it out. I do like Haunted Hospitals series, so I can't wait till the new one comes out. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, I met some of the other people that were filming that day. There's going to be some really interesting and unique stories in this season.
Okay. Oh, can't wait. Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to touch on before we let you go today?
No, that's kind of it. I'm really excited to be part of it. I think I mentioned Haunted Hospitals is on TNE.
Yes.
I mentioned when it premieres, April 5th at 10 p.m.
And do you want to promote your social media or your website or anything before we go as well?
So everybody can find me at Nurse Meg RN on TikTok and Instagram. And then my website is the same name, nursemegrn.com. And we do education for nursing school students and to pass the national exam and training new nurses in the hospital setting. And then, of course, we always tell some education, some entertaining stories and creepy stories.
Sounds awesome. Can't wait to check it out. I'll have to check out your stuff as well. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Trevor.
The paranormal can happen at any time, so that's why our Etsy store is always open. Get your paranormal items from cleansing to protection to attraction, all available now on our Etsy store. Search Haunting Live.
My name is Kimberly Kidson. I'm a travel nurse. I've been a nurse for 10 years, travel nursing now for 7 years. And I'm here today to talk about some of the experiences that I've had through travel nursing and some other experiences that I've had just through day-to-day life. I live on Vancouver Island in Canada, and I generally like to spend a lot of time outdoors. And right now I have a goal of seeing every waterfall on Vancouver Island.
So let's start with the season that's coming up, the new season of Haunted Hospitals. Talk about your experience that you're on there featured about.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the newest season of Haunted Hospitals, my story was featured on season 5, episodes 2. And basically it outlined some interactions that I had in a smaller, more rural location of the Pacific Northwest coast. There was a few different interactions that I had, and the crew at Haunted Hospitals was able to put it into a really amazing compilation of the events kind of happening. Even though they didn't happen together, they were able to kind of tie them together. And when we were doing filming for Haunted Hospitals, there was some periods of time when they were asking me questions about the interactions that I actually was able to make the connected dots, like in the instance of, certain rooms having more activity than others and certain connections throughout the hospital. So those were things that I didn't really overthink about until we were discussing them. And then I thought that was really neat that I was able to make those connections too.
How long have you been working in the hospital field then? Is that your full career, or did you go to school for that? Or
Yeah, so I've been working in hospitals for the past 10 years, probably a little bit more now. And I've worked in many hospitals around the area that I live in, British Columbia. So there's definitely a lot of different areas that I've worked in. The hospital that was featured was definitely the most active hospital, but there was some other instances that I had patients or residents passing, and there was movement of things in the room shortly after. Phantom smells that I've experienced that are like very strong smells that just come out of nowhere. And sometimes they're related to something in the area, sometimes they're not. And just like interactions with feeling presences and whatnot. So these have happened in communities that are rural, not rural, and in both hospital and long-term care facilities, which is quite prevalent for folks passing, which would be understandable that there would be some spirits left behind from time to time.
So your job is more of described as a traveling nurse. You go from different locations all the time. How is that to your experience with the paranormal then? Do you find it's more active in other locations, or is it?
Yeah, so I think that it depends on the age of the facility and the history of the facility, because I've worked in some newer facilities that I haven't felt any feelings in. But I've worked in some older facilities that had some history, and I've definitely had interactions or instances in those areas. In the newer facilities, when people pass, a cup might move on the table or something like that, but I don't feel that the presence stays in the facility. I feel that like they move on. But in some of the older facilities, it may not even be somebody who had passed with me. But I do feel like for instance, what was featured on Haunted Hospitals, the small girl, there was no instance before I had arrived or when I arrived that I knew about that there was a child that had passed in the hospital. So in that perspective, it tells me that spirit may have been there for a long period of time. So there's probably some history associated with that. And then there was another instance when I was working in a care home that was previously Mennonite hospital. There was some interactions of like furniture moving in the chapel area and lights turning on and off. But there was like two doors that were locked between the residence and the chapel. And I was on night shift when there was only 3 staff members, so I knew where everybody was,
Yeah, that's gonna make it more creepy when it's only certain people that you know are in the building alone, and then the stuff starts happening. So
Yeah,
describe
absolutely.
that was one I was kind of interested in talking to you more in depth about is I think I read in the description about a balloon or something. So was there a balloon incident somewhere that happened?
Yeah, so the balloon incident happened in a very small remote hospital that I really enjoy going to, and I always felt like there was kind of another source of energy there, but I didn't know exactly what it was until I started hearing things and things started to move. So the first interaction that I had was with footsteps. We had heard footsteps running around the nurses' station. And so we thought that one of our patients is up. So we have to go and track them down, make sure that they're safe, put them back to bed. So we kind of did a check on all the patients. Everybody was in bed and accounted for. The front doors were locked because it was night shift, and the person in emergency was accounted for and being treated. So I thought that was really odd that these footsteps were kind of running around the nurses' station, but we couldn't find anybody for it. And the nurses' station was like a very centralized area in the hospital, and there were hallways, every way around the nurses' station. And so the person I was working with and I thought, like, if we go opposite directions around the nurses' station, then perhaps we can find whatever that is making those footsteps. And while we were doing that, it sounded like the footsteps were getting louder and then quieter and louder and quieter as if we were passing them, but there was like nothing visual to see. And then we heard some like light giggling, like laughing at us, like as if it was a child teasing us. And then I thought, oh, well, that's odd. And then the care worker said, oh, that is the little girl. People say that they hear her laugh or hear her cry. Like, it's a good thing right now that she's laughing type thing. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So kind of made peace with that explanation because there was no other explanation, and continued on and kind of finished our shift, periodically hearing footsteps throughout the night. And then another time when I was working, my coworker was occupied with a patient, and I heard some screaming from the room near the nurse's station, which was the high acuity room. And that's where the very sick patients would go before we would ship them out to the city. And I heard some screaming from that room, and I opened the door, and the bed was perfectly made. There was nobody in the room, and it just seemed very odd to me because it sounded like clear as day, like a child was screaming from that room. So I shut the door, and after that night, I didn't hear any other screaming. It was just until I opened the door, I heard the screaming, and then there was no screaming and nobody was in the room. The window was shut, and it seemed still like chilled in there. But I didn't know if we had the heat turned on because it wasn't a room that we were using often. But just in that interaction, I thought that if she was crying or screaming from that room, perhaps that was an area, like maybe that was the room she passed in. Maybe she was being treated as a very ill child in that room, and maybe that's why she was having a different reaction coming from that room opposed to running in the hallway and laughing at us, right? And then from there, another interaction that I had with her, and these interactions were all within a short period of time, but not, within the same day by any means. Another interaction that I had with her was the balloon, where in the video of that they portrayed for the story, they did a really great job in doing it. So, but one thing was that my chair was sitting right next to the door, not down the hallway from the door. So when the balloon came out, it just had appeared and it wasn't like coming down the hallway at me. So that was one thing that I was like, oh, this is almost exactly how it happened. But the balloon just literally came out and was right next to me. And in that instance, we had a patient who had a birthday. The family brought in balloons and flowers, and the balloon was in the far corner of the room, facing the bed so that the patient could see the balloon. And then I put the patient to bed around 11 p.m. and tucked her in. And I was sitting outside the patient's room because the patient didn't know to ring their call bell because they had dementia so bad. And they would just lightly say, help me, help me. And there was no way that we could hear like that small voice at the nurse's station. So I would sit outside the room just to make sure that if she was calling in that quiet voice, that I was able to hear her and help her. And so that's why I was sitting outside the room, just kind of keeping extra eyes on her. And then while I was doing that, I was charting, and I just felt like there was a presence next to me. And when I looked, the balloon was like around this, like, sitting level next to me. And I thought, oh, well, that's really odd. And so I got up off the chair and grabbed the balloon, put it back in the far corner of the room, and then came back out, didn't close the door because I still wanted to hear her calling, and we shouldn't have the doors closed anyways. But ended up coming out, sitting in the chair. I kind of just felt the presence again. And when I looked over, sure enough, the balloon was there again. So I took it and I put it back in the room, and I just felt like at this point it's more than a coincidence because it happened so quickly for it to just reappear. So I put it in the room and I shut the door nearly all the way, just so I could still hear my patient's little voice. And then the door actually ended up opening, and the balloon came out into the hallway. And then at that point, I moved from the chair by the door to a different chair, and then the balloon kind of came at me and hovered over me, and which wasn't portrayed in the episode of Haunted Hospitals. But I felt like there was a pressure on my chest, like when the balloon was over me. I felt like I wanted to stand up and to walk away, but I felt like I was being pushed down. Like there was a pressure on my chest and on my shoulders that I couldn't stand up and walk away.
Okay.
So in turn, I kind of slid out to the side and kind of crawled out from below, and then was able to get kind of away by going down and out instead of standing straight up towards the balloon, because I felt like there was a force keeping me from standing up towards the balloon at that point. And I just thought, wow, I'm not going to touch that balloon again because of the way it made me feel so heavy, and I had to lower myself to get away from it. So then in that instance, I ended up just leaving it and kept an eye on it for sure. And I actually videotaped it, and I have live footage of it, which I showed the folks at Haunted Hospitals, but I'm the only one that has the actual recording because there's, patient photos in it and stuff like that. I can't, just a patient's photo on a door, and I can't jeopardize confidentiality for. But yeah, it was a really heavy experience, like having that weight on me and not being able to get up.
Yeah.
And then after that, I went to all of the different rooms in the hospital, and in my head, I'm wondering, okay, this is more than nothing. Something's happening here, and why is this balloon going to each of the rooms? And then it made me think of the little girl that was laughing and kind of running around, and then that other time crying. And it made me wonder if it was that little girl who found the balloon, thought, wow, like this is really fun. It's a toy for me. And decided to take the balloon, and that was showing her presence in the hospital and everywhere she was going. And seeing that she was stopping at every room to stop at the door.
Yes. How do you feel after that experience? How do you feel about working with spirits and energies in hospitals now?
Well, with her, even though she felt heavy, I didn't feel like I was going to be harmed by her in that instance. But I don't know if she is. I don't know if she is capable of that kind of inflicting harm on somebody. And at the same time, I'm a firm believer in mind over matter. So I also believe, hopefully I'm believing properly, but in my beliefs, I believe that if I don't believe that they can hurt me, these spirits can't hurt me, and they can't have an effect over me. And I just have to be very diligent about not over interacting and kind of leaving it at the door. Since then, I've invested in protection stones and protection oils, which are grounding oils that have cedar and rocks and sand and things like that. And then of course essential oils too, but they offer protection. One of those things that kind of led me to find another thing, which then I feel like gives me more confidence in interacting with the spirits, because I feel like I am more protected, more than just my beliefs protected me in the beginning.
That's good. I think that'll help you as well. Like if you have the oils and the crystals as well, those should help protect you from anything that you feel is negative or anything in your workplace. So
absolutely, for sure. And then there was the other interaction there that was the man that I was actually able to see, and he was more of just like a dark shaded figure. But my patient also saw him too, which then reiterated to me wow, this is something that more than that my patient's also seeing too. I was scared because I felt frozen to the bone in that instance. And I also felt like I couldn't move my entire body, whereas with the balloon, at least I could like hunch down and crawl away. The man was just a very dark figure that appeared, and then within seconds of looking away or reaching for something, like, I went to enter the room. The first time I saw him, he was just a figure through the observation window, and then I went to enter the room and he wasn't there. The second time, it was him standing like behind me and my patient screaming, and me thinking that I scared my patient, but she was actually, no, it's that man. And then when I looked, I was like, wow, like that is something that's there. And it was definitely a dark being. Definitely always good to be cognizant of everything that's going on and around you.
Yep. Oh, thank you very much for sharing. So,
thank you for having me. It was really nice chatting with you today.
Spring is a time of rebirth and renewal and budding terror. Spring Shivers is back.
Whoa! Oh my God, something's moving in there!
And we're celebrating the season of renewal with a week of fan-favorite marathons and season premieres. Let your fear blossom during Spring Shivers. Starts April 1st, only on TNE.
the paranormal can happen at any time, so that's why our Etsy store is always open. Get your paranormal items from cleansing to protection to attraction, all available now on our Etsy store. Search HauntingLive